Hey guys, thanks for being here. My last two videos, I did a video on the oil tanker industry and also how I think about valuing individual oil tanker stocks. In that video, I asked if you guys would want to hear about specific oil tanker companies, and I will get to that sometime this weekend. But today I wanted to do something else. It's been a pressing idea on my mind, and it's about the oil industry in general. And today I'm going to be talking about why oil is not dead and is not going to be dead for a long time. The reason I wanted to do this is because I have heard several who I think intelligent people talking about how we may have already reached peak oil, or how we may reach peak oil in 10 years. And I just fundamentally don't agree. I'd like to start with this. This is a graph of energy use over time. And notice on the left-hand side, we start in about the year 1850. We are using energy primarily from a source, biomass. Over time, however, you'll notice that we have developed more and more new energy sources. But the main thing I would like to to illustrate in this by showing this graph is that energy requirements for civilization as a whole, all human civilization, has increased rapidly over time. And there are two reasons for why. First of all, the global population has increased almost exponentially over time. And second, world energy use strongly correlates to increases in technology. So not only is population increased, but standards of living over time globally have also tended to increase, which means that people all over the world have more and more technology. Another way that I like to think about this graph is in terms of an anecdote on my own life. So for example, when I was a child, when I was a very young child, I remember in my household growing up, we started off, and I think we only had one television. So we would watch TV in the living room, and there was a few appliances here and there. But as I got older, more and more technology was introduced to my house. So, for example, at some point, we had a family computer introduced to the household, and then we also had something like a fax machine, archaic technology, but that was also in our house. And then over time, as I got older, as I was a young child, I got my own television in my room, and then eventually that family computer broke, but my dad got his own laptop, my mom got her own personal computer, and then as I became a teenager, I got a personal computer, yeah? Then, in the 2000s, cell phones started getting introduced, so both of my parents had cell phones, and then as I became a late teen, I got a cell phone. So the point of all of this is that if you think about our own lives, or many of us, the energy demand, even in our own single lives, is increasing a lot. Even as I am now, as a setup, I have multiple monitors, I've got a computer, I've got a smartphone. I use way more energy than I did as a child, and I am only one human being. And the amount of human beings in the world is increasing over time. So I'd like to start off with the bear case for oil, and you'll hear something like this. So the big bear argument: EVs, electric vehicles, have permanently changed the game. So a large portion of oil use does come from transportation, specifically vehicles and personal vehicles. And since electrical vehicles have been growing in demand and production, well, that naturally means that the demand for oil should decrease, right? We will see something like exponential growth in EV sales. Not only 10 years ago, we had worldwide, we only had 100,000 in sales for these vehicles, but today we have almost 3 million in sales, right? So since these vehicles don't run on oil, that means that overall demand for oil is going to go down, right? No, that's not true. And this is why, right? We think about these things in terms of the Western world, and I'd like you to check your bias. The vast majority of growth happening, remember, as we have exponential population growth, is coming from the undeveloped world, the dark orange nations. So South America, Africa, and Asia. Although we are seeing growth in electric vehicles in China specifically, the rest of these nations are not investing in electric vehicles. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Can these vehicles drive their Priuses and Teslas? No, because think about the infrastructure in these nations, yeah? Can electric vehicles travel vast distances on poor infrastructure? So if you think about a Prius and or whatever electric vehicle is your favorite, if you're driving on dirt roads for long distances, do you think any of these vehicles are going to be able to effectively do it, right? And second of all, if you think about their electric grids, when your nation has an undeveloped and unstable electrical grid, are you going to be able to power these electrical vehicles to and you be able to use these reliably? The answer is no. You need oil-based vehicles. These nations are not going to, jump from the Stone Age to the Space Age. There's a process to these things. Yeah, they need wireless energy to grow and increase their standard of living. And what does that come from? It comes from oil. Now I'd like to show you this to further emphasize my point, is global car sales from 2005 to 2020. So currently there's an estimated 1.42 billion cars in the world. So if you're thinking that 3 million cars were electric last year, well, that's still very minuscule compared to the total amount of vehicles being used in the world. But I'd like to make a specific point. If you look at the orange vehicles, these are vehicle sales, the orange bars are vehicle sales from the European Union. You will notice that over time, since 2005 to currently, there is very little change, if not a slight decline, in the amount of total vehicles being sold. If you look at the United States, no new vehicles being purchased, you will notice that the same thing as the European Union, the total amount of vehicles being sold is not increased. If anything, it is stagnated or even slightly decreased. If you look at China, China does have a significant portion of the electric vehicle market, but if you look at this significant growth and you think about the light green bars, and you think about China in terms of their infrastructure, they're still developing a large portion of their nation, and these rural areas in China, they're not going to be able to rely on electric vehicles. They need petroleum-based vehicles. If you think about the rest of the world, on the top, the purple, there is significant growth. From 2005 until 2019, there has been about 1.5 times as many vehicles being sold in 2019 versus 2005, right? So there's been significant growth every year in total vehicles being sold. Can these undeveloped nations, do you think, like with the undeveloped infrastructure, with the unreliable electrical grid, do you think they're going to be investing heavily into electric vehicles? No, they're not. They need oil-based vehicles. The second argument bears may say about the oil industry, well, you got renewable industry, bruh. You got your windmills and they go brrr, and you got your solar, and it can capture infinite energy. It's so beautiful. And you can just put all of that energy inside a battery, and you can just use it whenever the heck you want, man. This is a post I made on the bottom right-hand corner in this screen on a forum that kind of emphasizes a lot of people think about the renewable industry. So this was an exchange that we're going back and forth for a little while, and I was arguing about why I thought oil isn't going anywhere. And this guy, we'll just call him Cool Guy. He said, oh, we got batteries. Let me just read the post. The biggest crack in this theory is this. The West is devoting itself to intermittent renewables and not nuclear energy. This guarantees continued fossil fuel use. You can replace every car in the US with electric, but there's no wind or no sun to power your car. They're going to be burning fuel to charge those batteries, and it won't be coal. And so there's this common belief that, well, we're just going to store it in batteries. And I hate to break it to you guys, there's no large-scale solution to storing vast quantities of energy in a battery. And you don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to use an appeal to ethos here. And I'm going to show you guys Mr. Gates's opinion on the topic.
So a lot of people are very optimistic, as you know, with wind and solar, the renewables cost coming down, the battery costs are coming down. You think that's enough, or do you think they need more?
That is so disappointing. I mean, really. Václav yesterday, he said, okay, here's Tokyo, 27 million people. You have 3 days of a cyclone basically every year. It's 22 gigawatts rate over 3 days. Tell me what battery solution is going to sit there and provide that power. I mean, let's not joke around. You're multiple orders of magnitude, $100 per kilowatt hour. That's nothing. That doesn't solve the reliability problem. And remember, electricity is 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. Whenever we came up with this term clean energy, I think it screwed up people's minds because now they don't understand. I was at this conference in New York, I won't name it, and they were saying, all these financial guys got on stage and said, oh, we're going to rate companies in terms of their CO2 output. And we're going to say this company puts out a lot of CO2 and financial markets are magical, and all of a sudden the CO2 will stop being emitted. And I was like, okay, how are you going to make steel? Do you guys on Wall Street, do you have something in your desks that makes steel? What? Where's the fertilizer, cement, plastic? Where's it going to come from? Do planes fly through the sky because of some number you put on a spreadsheet? So the madness of this so-called finance is the solution. I just don't get that. There is no substitute for how the industrial economy runs today.
So there's two major takeaways I think about this. The first is, like I was saying, the energy itself is renewable energy, which it's coined. It's intermittent, it's not reliable. And so you could use it to supplement your current grid, but it's not a solution on its own. And the more you devote yourself to this intermittent source, the more it kind of ensures that you will continue to need fossil fuels. And I don't think that fossil fuel source is going to be coal. It's going to be natural gas, and it's going to be oil. The second point that I want to make about this is that all of these renewable sources that you're devoting yourself to, they take an inordinate amount of energy also to produce. So like Bill Gates was saying, you need your steel, you need rare earth metals like copper, aluminum, lithium, whatever it is, to produce your windmills and your solar panels. To think about how all of these things are mined, you need fossil fuels to mine those. So It's twofold, because number one, it's not a solution to solving oil, and you're using oil to produce these things, right? Okay, let's move on. So this is kind of the next iteration on what I'd like to get into. It's sentiment, and how I think sentiment is kind of correlates to a few things. So this is an article or several articles from The Economist, popular magazine, and it's been around for decades. Yeah, in 1999, they produced wrote a article on oil called "Drowning in Oil." Essentially, they're predicting that oil is in a permanent decline, and immediately after producing this article, the price of oil went from, it looks like, 20 to, I don't know, like $60 over a year or two, right? So they were extremely wrong. In 2003, same thing. They produced an article called "The End of an Oil Age." So by then, the price of oil was way down again, and they were wrong once again. The oil age has not ended, and in fact, the use of oil and the price immediately following this article went to the moon again. In 2016, they produced another article called "Who's Afraid of Cheap Oil?" Same thing, they were wrong. Oil went from a low to another high. So what I'm trying to show you this is that how people feel about an industry is based on what is going on now. People are very, they don't make good predictions about the future. They're very good at figuring out what's happening in the present, but they're not very good about figuring out what's going to happen in the future. Yeah. And a lot of this sentiment, a lot of these beliefs tend to be based on the success, the price, the profitability of oil companies at that specific time, without thinking about it in terms of a large macro view like I do. Today, the new sentiment, the new idea that I think people have that is kind of like The Economist is something called the new normal. And if you're like me and you get triggered like by this saying, and like Mr. Jackson here, you may see that it's kind of absurd. The new normal doesn't reflect reality. It reflects what's happening at the present. It's reflecting a global pandemic. It's not reflecting what's going to happen in the future. People say, well, we can just do everything. We can work remotely. We can, we don't need to commute anymore. We can just do everything on Zoom calls. Yeah. And for some industries, maybe you can, but for the vast majority of jobs, it doesn't make any lick of sense. So think about it like this, if you're, let's say you're Domino's or you're Pizza Hut, are you going to be able to cook pizzas remotely? Are you going to be able to deliver those with your Zoom call? No. Let's say let's say for like people say, well, you can just go do telemedicine remotely now. Are you going to be able to get a prostate exam in a Zoom call? Are you going to be able to do that? You think that's an effective solution to going to visit your doctor? And myself, I'm a teacher, and I'll tell you this: there are some benefits to technology and learning, but I'll tell you the net result of remote learning is far less effective than it would be in person for small children. It's not an effective solution to have kids sitting in front of their computer for learning, right? So it doesn't make sense, right? And another way you can think about this is when I mentioned before, when you're thinking about it in terms of the developing world, how many of these developing nations are going to be able to replace their jobs, their livelihood, their economic success with this new normal? With remote working. It's lunacy. It's the same thing as the economist. It's looking at things now and not thinking about things in terms of the new picture. And this is not an excuse. This is not a reason why oil is going to get displaced. Yeah. And I would also like to show you another example of the sentiment from a man called Mr. Jim Cramer.
What about the two big oil companies, Exxon and Chevron, today? Both of them drags on the Dow right now.
I know that Mike won't want to hear this, but I'm done with fossil fuels. They're done. Yeah, they're just done. We're starting to see divestment all over the world. We're starting to see the companies just regard them as, big pension funds saying, listen, we're not going to own them anymore. It doesn't matter.
Do you think that's the biggest thing holding these guys back, and not necessarily just oil production here in the United States?
Absolutely. I think it is. You could say, listen, China, obviously swing market. Smart. No, the world's changed. There's new managers. They don't want to hear whether these are good or bad. Look at BP. It's a solid yield. Very good. Look at Chevron buying back $5 billion worth of stock. Nobody cares. And this has to do with new kinds of money managers who, frankly, just want to appease younger people who believe that you can't ever make a fossil fuel company sustainable. That's why I said Mike Wirth's trying everything he can. But in the end, they make fossil fuels. And that's going to be, we're in the death knell phase. I know that's very
death knell phase
contrary,
for the stocks, but not for the death knell phase for us using fossil fuels, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that the issue is sustainability. Look, this is the other side of Tesla. These stocks don't want to be owned by younger people. Their dividends are great. These companies are doing better than, obviously, when oil was at even 4 years ago, when oil was at 26, 27. But you can tell that the world's turned on them. And it's actually kind of happening very quickly. You're seeing divestiture by a lot of different funds. It's going to be a parade. It's going to be a parade that says, look, these are tobacco, and we're not going to own them.
Wow. That's a really tough stream to swim against.
They're tobacco.
If that's the case.
I think they're tobacco. We're in a new world. And some of us could be kicking and screaming to even believe that could be the case, but they're tobacco.
So sentiment follows price, and if price is low, that drives sentiment, and sentiment drives long-term views. So for the average person, not that Cramer is not intelligent, he's a very intelligent person, but from the majority of human beings, we think of these things in terms of what's happening now, and now is in terms of price, and it's low, right? So in summary, EV growth is small and not particularly viable for the vast majority of the developing world. Oil is a wireless energy source, which is extremely beneficial for developing world, right? Second point I'd like to make is that intermittent collection energy sources, I'm going to coin that phrase here today, ICESs, or renewables, cannot supplant rapid growing energy need around the world or to be stored effectively on a large scale. And that they also require a vast amount of fossil fuels to be produced. You can supplement your grid with them, but you cannot replace them with them, right? And then the third thing, I showed you with Mr. Cramer and The Economist, is that sentiment in the oil industry, it follows the price. Human minds don't tend to grasp cyclical industries very well. Now, I would like to close by saying there is one thing that would change my mind if we ever mass adopt it with the sentiment changes in this industry, and that would change my opinion on fossil fuels because it could rapidly supplant fossil fuels. And that is something called nuclear energy. Fortunately for oil, this is an even more despised industry than fossil fuels. Doesn't make sense to me. If you wanted to go, if your goal was net zero emissions, you could do this in 5 to 10 years rapidly if we had something like a nuclear Green New Deal. You wouldn't have the issue with intermittency. It would be, you wouldn't need energy from foreign sources in terms of the United States. And if the zeitgeist on nuclear energy ever changed, I would immediately get out of oil stocks. nuclear adoption would change my mind immediately. But I'm going to close with something that I find to be of importance too. So even though I am very bullish on oil in terms of a macro view, I'd like to share this quote. We overestimate technology in the short term, and we underestimate technology in the long term. So for myself, even though I have this view on oil, and although I don't think that there is any technology to supplant it, I do hope to have an open mind and continue to reevaluate my beliefs. If you like this video and you found it useful, I would really appreciate a like. And if you'd like to see more content like this, please click subscribe. Until next time.